The Slaanesh roster is one reliant on speed and momentum to roll through enemies before they have a chance to react. Everything from their front lines to their monsters has a strong reliance on killing enemies as fast as possible to minimise damage to themselves and maximise damage on enemy units. They come with some of the most powerful cav units in the game alongside one of the biggest cav rosters we've ever seen, so if you're not a big micro head, it can be a little bit much, but if you can master them, then you're in for some very one-sided battles. We'll first start by going over the pros and cons of the Slaanesh battle gameplay. For the pros, their main strength of course lies in the cavalry and chariots, as they have some of the fastest and most powerfully charging units in the game. Alongside this, pretty much every demonic unit in the roster has the devastating flanker trait, which doubles their charge bonus when attacking the enemy flanks. This can allow you to roll straight through unsuspecting enemies if they don't react in time. And to make this even better, the overall speed of the roster is high, with most units having higher speed than anything any other roster can throw at you in the same category. This allows you to make the most of those flanks with ease. As for the cons, the heavy reliance on cav and chariots does mean you're going to need to use micro a lot more with these lads than any of the other chaos rosters, so if you aren't really a fan of stressfully micromanaging chariots all the way through your battles, then you may struggle here. The roster is also one of the less armoured, with many units having armour that's barely into the double digits. Sure, they have some physical resistance, but against magical attacks and spells, they can be wiped out incredibly quickly. To add to this problem, they are also lacking a lot of melee defense on most units, meaning the longer you are in combat, the more hits they are going to take, so you need to wipe out enemies as fast as possible to survive. Slaanesh also has access to 3 abilities in battle. These are shown on the bar on the right side of the screen, and the bar fills up as you kill enemies in negative morale states, so basically anything that's already broken and running. You need 100 points for each tier, and you unlock them in this order. Fascination is the first and causes damage over time to a target, as well as causing them to go on a rampage. Narcissism is second and prevents them from moving for 13 seconds, and Sweet Sorrow is third and increases move speed and replenishes vigor for 20 seconds. Using any ability totally drains the bar, and they also have their own internal cooldowns, so you can't spam them quite so easy. Now we come to the roster, starting with the Lords. Of course, they only have one legendary Lord at this time, and that's Nakari. He's a spellcaster, deals armor-piercing damage, and causes terror. In battle, he is an extremely quick and deadly fighter, with high speed that can rival most cavalry, and excellent melee stats and damage that allow him to take on enemies, no matter if they have armor, resistances, or a ton of HP. He doesn't really care, since they all fall just the same. Of course, as is the Slaanesh way, he doesn't have much armor, so large amounts of focus damage can be his downfall if you aren't careful, but his 20% physical resist can help with this somewhat. Alongside being a powerhouse in combat, he is also a powerful spellcaster with access to Lore of Slaanesh, which can be devastating with multiple destruction spells, alongside some deadly buffs and debuffs. Combined with his mobility, this makes him into a versatile fighter that can zip around the map at high speeds to assist your army wherever needed with magic and damage alike. And he also comes with a couple of abilities. Soul Siphon, which causes damage to nearby wavering or lower enemies, Harvester of Souls, which grants HP and vigor regeneration whenever an enemy unit is wiped out nearby, and Willing Prey, which reduces the melee stats of a targeted enemy unit. The first of our non-legendary lords is the Heralds of Slaanesh. These are spellcasters and deal armor-piercing damage, and you can either choose them in the Lore of Slaanesh or the Lore of Shadows. Of all the Heralds of Chaos, these are the most multi-class, as they combine their magical knowledge with powerful battling prowess. They are fast and attack viciously, especially on enemy flanks, with their devastating flanker traits, so don't be afraid to send them around with a group to tear the enemy apart when they least expect it. Their spells from both lores are very powerful, both in terms of damage and the buffs and debuffs they can place on the battlefield. Think of them as very powerful Demonettes that want to be right there in a pack of infantry, taking the enemy head on before retreating when things get hot, and tossing out the occasional spell. To top it all off, they also come with the Soul Siphon ability. They also have the choice of 3 mounts. Their Steeds of Slaanesh are the fastest choice you have, so if you want them to be pure spellcasters, then this is the one for you to zip them around where magic is needed. You can still fight of course, but this allows them to be as mobile as possible. The Seeker Chariot grants large increases to charge at the cost of being next to useless in sustained combat, and the Exalted Seeker Chariot, which grants them perfect vigor alongside one of the most devastating charges in the game, but again, requires a lot more micromanagement. If you are comfortable with chariots, then the Exalted Seeker Chariot will devastate whatever you send it against, but if not, it's probably easier to go with the Steed. And of course, as with all Heralds of Chaos, upon reaching level 15, they can choose to evolve into Exalted Demons. They evolve into the Exalted Keepers of Secrets, which are spellcasters and deal armor-piercing anti-large damage, and of course, keep whatever lore spells you originally had on your Herald. This evolution takes away even more armor in exchange for extremely high speed and viciously high damage, turning them into destroyers of clumps of enemies, or 1 versus 1 with other large single entities. The high speed also allows them to chase down a lot of cav units, and no foot troop can outrun them, meaning they are very hard to get away from. They will also keep the same lore of magic as before, so you'll still be able to provide that spell support where needed with their high speed. Just think of them as a slightly weaker Nakari, since that's essentially what they are, but with a bonus versus large. Of course, they also gain some abilities to assist them in combat. Seductive Glory reduces enemy melee defense nearby. Ballet of Blows gradually increases damage and attack stats over 45 seconds. Glamour of Slaanesh reduces enemy melee stats nearby. Soul Siphon, which we mentioned earlier. And Feast on Fear, which replenishes HP per every unit nearby with wavering or lower morale. Now we come to the heroes, starting with the Cultists of Slaanesh. This is an anti-infantry unit, and quite like most of the other cultists, these lads are a little confusing since they don't have a lot of defense or super high damage, so sending them in can feel like sending them to the chopping block. That being said, these lads do gain physical resistance and anti-infantry, so early in the game they won't perform too terribly, but just be sure to keep them relatively safe, otherwise they will likely go down very quickly. They can also get on their Chaos Steed mounts, which grant them a little more combat prowess, but they aren't going to be the star of any battle. Their real power lies in the Gate of Slaanesh ability, which allows them to summon Demonettes, or even Keepers of Secrets once leveled up in the campaign. If you're taking them into the late game, then you want to keep them safe to use their summons, and avoid combat with anything even remotely substantial at basically all costs. Our other heroes are the Illurisers. These are spellcasters and deal armor-piercing damage. You can choose to recruit them with the Lore of Slaanesh or the Lore of Shadow, and quite like all of the other branches of Chaos, these lads are essentially the Heralds of Slaanesh, but with worse stats. You want to use them more or less the same, which means moving them around with a pack of Demonettes, and maybe getting a flank on the enemy and slaughtering them in melee. Pull them out if they take too many hits, and keep up the pressure with spell support wherever you can. They have the exact same mounting choices as the Herald, so the same advice applies here. Steed for speedy spellcasting support and less micro, Seeker Chariot for more charge and more micro, and Exalted Seeker Chariot for the best charge, and you guessed it, the most micro. Now we come to the melee infantry, starting with the Marauders of Slaanesh. These are a tier 1 unit, are shielded, deal anti-infantry damage, and are a meat shield unit. As early game infantry goes, these lads are really pretty poor. They have terrible armor, not a ton of HP, terrible melee stats, and passable damage and leadership. So they aren't exactly grade A material, but what would you expect when you're looking at a meat shield? Their sole purpose is to absorb the enemy charge and hold them in place to allow other units to get around and flank the enemy front lines to force their leadership to break as soon as possible. Leaving these guys to fight on their own is asking for trouble, so please, please, please don't do it, as they will simply die. They do, thankfully, come in 2 other variations. The Marauders of Slaanesh Spears are another tier 1 unit, and are of course shielded, deal anti-large damage, and are still a meat shield. These are a little step up with more melee defense stats alongside spears for charge resistance. This does come at the cost of them somehow being even worse offensively with worse damage, weapon strength, and charge bonus, but their job remains the same, so it hardly matters. Sit there and absorb enemy charges. Now they can also absorb a cav charge, and they will last a little bit longer, so in my book, they could be worse. And our other variation is the Hell Scourgers. These are another tier 1 unit, and are a shielded defender meat shield. These boys are the middle ground between Marauders and Spears. They have very high defense, so are decently resilient in combat, and they do a good amount of damage with a relatively high melee stat for this stage of the game. I would say having 4 of these guys in the middle of 2 Spears would make for a pretty decent early game front line, but you'll want to replace them once the enemy get any armor or more damage, as they will just not hold up. You still want to support them with more units to flank the enemy lines, or monsters to embed in yours, as their damage still isn't the greatest, but early on in the game, they're the best option you have for the job they're doing. Now we come to the Demonettes. These are a tier 2 unit, deal armor piercing damage, and are very fast. These are an extremely squishy unit with 5 armor, and even with 20% physical resistance, they really can't stand up to a lot of punishments, and if the enemy has enemy spells or magical attacks,
holy shit, you better get out of the way.
However, they make up for this with high speed and very respectable damage and melee stats for when you unlock them. This makes them into great flanking units, especially once you remember they have the devastating flanker trait, which nets them buffs when attacking the enemy in the rear. And I would say to use them for exactly that. Get around the backs of the enemy front lines and charge them into the back to wipe them out as quickly as possible. They're also excellent at taking out ranged units with their high speed, but is a waste of their damage. Offload that job onto Cav if you can, but if you can't get any, then send a unit or 2 into the back lines to wipe them out as quickly as possible before returning to take on higher value targets. And of course they come in another variation, Exalted Demonettes. These are a tier 3 units, have armor piercing damage, are very fast and have enthralling attacks which reduce enemy melee stats upon hit. The Exalted variants, as usual, are better in nearly every single stat, so perform the same jobs, just do them a little bit better. They also pick up the Soul Sense ability, which grants them increased combat capabilities based on the number of wavering or lower enemies nearby. Just use them pretty much the same, but eventually they're going to transition into your front lines rather than flankers, and they'll perform just fine here as well, as long as you provide support to them as quickly as you can. Now we come to the Cavalry and Chariots, and every single one of these units is a tier 3. First up we have the Hellstriders of Slaanesh. These come with anti-large damage, poison attacks, and are of course very fast. These are your average early game cav units, with a decent charge, high speed, and poor sustained melee stats. You want to use their speed to keep them on the move and out of reach of enemy units before charging into their back lines or onto the backs of the front lines to break their spirits as quickly as possible. Never ever leave them in combat, as they will die extremely quickly. They also have the Soul Hunter ability, which grants them damage resistance, leadership and charge bonus for every kill they make. And they come in another variation. The Hellstriders of Slaanesh with Hell Scourges now have anti-infantry damage as well as the poison attacks and are still very fast. These are more or less the same units, but gain significant buffs to melee stats and weapon strength at the cost of losing anti-large. This still doesn't mean they can hit the front lines and stay in, it more means they will have a quicker and easier time taking out ranged units before looping back to cycle charge the front lines. Next we have the Seeker Chariots. These deal armor-piercing anti-infantry damage and are extremely fast. Now we all know chariots are basically the pinnacle of micromanagement. You must keep them on the move all time or they will fall in combat before you can react. And these lads, they're no different. They come with a devastating charge for such an early unit, and of course absolutely terrible melee stats, meaning they must be charged in and out of combat constantly to deal and avoid damage. Luckily they are extremely fast, so going around the enemy to charge into them shouldn't be a problem. If you're into micro, then go right ahead, but if you're more about set it and forget it, perhaps look for something else. They come in another variation, the Exalted Seeker Chariots. These deal armor-piercing anti-infantry damage and are very fast. Of course, the Exalted version boasts improved stats for nearly everything, including a high upgrade to charge bonus and weapon strength. This does come at the cost of them now being a single entity, but when you have 6 times the weapon strength, does it really matter? They also come with perfect vigor, so can charge around the map the entire battle and never tire of shredding enemies with their bladed wheels. The same advice as all chariots applies again here. Keep them on the move, in and out of the enemy lines, and never let them sit still in combat, as they just melt. Do all this, they're going to get a lot of kills. Next we have the Seekers of Slaanesh. These deal armor piercing damage, have poison attacks, and are very fast. These are pretty much the direct upgrade to Hellstriders, with somehow even less armor and the same high speed. They are a very risky cav to use with a high ceiling for reward if you can master them. They have the same great charge bonus and now come with armor piercing weapon damage and even high melee stats, meaning they will shred even the most resilient backlines units before coming in with a powerful charge to the enemy front lines. They should still not be left in sustained combat with anything that can put up even half a fight, as they simply don't have the resilience to survive, and you're not making the most of that charge bonus. The Heartseekers of Slaanesh deal armor piercing damage, have poison attacks, and are still extremely quick. Heartseekers come with improvements to nearly every single stat over regular Seekers, which pretty much makes them the cooler Seekers of Slaanesh. They can do anything the original unit can, only better, with more damage, almost to the point of being able to take part in sustained melee fighting, but just because they can, doesn't mean they should. They are still most effective when charging into the enemy backs and crushing them against your front lines. And our final chariot unit is the Hell Flayers. These are more or less the direct upgrade to Seeker Chariots and work as a decent rest stop between Seekers and Exalted Seekers, since you unlock them quite a ways apart. They gain increases to leadership, melee attack, and weapon strength, making them into more powerful chargers. Use them pretty much the same as you did the Seeker Chariots, so if you can get the hang of one, you will only be better with the other. Just keep them charging and moving, and don't let them get bogged down, or you will regret it. I know it seems like I'm saying the same advice and rushing through these, but they're all chariots, so you want to use them pretty much the same, so that the same advice applies for all of these units. Now we come to the monsters and beasts. First up we have the Chaos Furies of Slaanesh. These are a tier 2 unit, come with armor piercing damage, vanguard deployment, and are extremely fast. As with all Chaos factions, Slaanesh also has access to the Furies. His version can do everything the others can, but now has the devastating flanker trait, which allows them to flank devastatingly and double their charge bonus when attacking the rear. To keep things balanced, their base charge bonus and weapon strength is a little lower than other factions' Furies. This makes them worse in sustained combats, but better at cycle charging, as long as they are proccing that flanker ability. So of course this is exactly what you're going to want to use them for. Get them to surround enemy ranged units 2-on-1, send one in, and then send another in to attack them in the rear to make the most of that damage, cycle charge this until you wipe them out. Yes, the charge isn't the best in the world because they are a very light mass flying unit, but you gotta do the best with what you've got. They should do just fine against enemy weaker backlines, but once they start to get anything with a bit more fighting prowess online, you'll probably want to swap them out. The Spawn of Slaanesh are a tier 3 unit and come with Unbreakable and the Soporific Musk, which reduces enemy melee stats. Another unit that has been more or less ripped from Warhammer 2 and tweaked for each Chaos faction. The Slaanesh variants come with the devastating flanker trait and high melee defense, which is a bit of an odd combo. They can still be used pretty much the same as all the other ones, and I would say that's still the best way to use them. Get them embedded in your front lines and dealing damage whilst protected by your infantry. They don't have the most armor piercing damage in the world, so once you get into the endgame and the enemy have a high armored front line, they will fall off a little bit, and you'll need to replace them, but until then, you can use them to wipe out chaff like crazy. Yes, we're not making the most of that devastating flanker ability, but with these guys, they're not really fast enough to get that flank off anyway, and it is much better to have that presence in your front line and then send something else around to flank for them. Next we have the Fiends of Slaanesh. These are a tier 3 unit, come with armor piercing damage, the Soporific Musk, and are very fast. Now these are truly unique monsters that's really unlike anything we've seen in any of the other rosters. They are extremely fast and hit incredibly hard, with high weapon strength and pretty high melee stats for a monster. This makes them into great flanking monsters that get around the backs of enemy front lines and either dismantle their ranged troops in moments, or hard focus on the backs of the front lines to shatter their spirits. You can send them straight in with your front lines. Besides, this way you get to make the most of that devastating flanker trait. And to top it all off, they have that soporific Musk basic attack to reduce the enemy melee stats, meaning these boys are only going to do better the longer they are focusing on any one target. Next we have the Soul Grinder of Slaanesh. This is a tier 3 unit, is armoured, deals armour piercing damage, causes terror, and has magical attacks. Now each branch of Chaos also has one of these. The Slaanesh one has no ranged weaponry, but has an increased weapon damage, a bonus versus large, and the soporific Musk. This makes them into fantastic frontlines monsters, as their massive damage can carve through pretty much everything like a hot knife through butter. Their bonus versus large also allows them to take down enemy large targets and duel them one-on-one whilst dealing a lot of damage. When combined with their melee debuff imbued attacks, whoever they're targeting isn't going to have a great time. It's really not a bad way to use these guys. Send them into the front lines, they'll do great. Send them to target enemy cav, they'll do just fine. Send them to take down enemy monsters one-on-one, they'll probably do alright. They're a brilliant unit and you're definitely going to want some of them in your armies. And our final unit is the Keeper of Secrets. These are tier 3 units, they are spellcasters, shielded, and deal armor piercing and magical damage. They're pretty much like the Lord, but with no skill trees and less spells and abilities. That being said, they can unlock more spells through research in the campaign, but even without them, they are extremely powerful demons. They are still fast as hell and deal devastating damage to whatever they can get their hands on, so feel free to send them all over the map to take out whatever needs taken out. They do have 2 spells before any research, the Lash of Slaanesh and Acquiescence, so can still provide spell support wherever they are. Not much to say here since they really are just weakened lords. Have them do the same stuff and they'll do a great job. Just be careful to keep them safe from ranged focus, as they are still large and even with that high speed, they can go down very fast. In Warhammer 3, every unit has a tier from 1 to 3, and I'm going to be using these tiers to make you some armies for the early, mid and late game, so that you are set for every single step of your campaign. Starting with tier 1, our army is going to be led by a Herald of Slaanesh using the Lore of Slaanesh. Of course we only have the one choice of Lord here, and of course we're going to go with the Lore of Slaanesh since it's new, powerful, and it's the Slaanesh army, so you kind of have to. Now for our front line, we're going to go with 6 Marauder Spears and 13 Marauder Hellscourgers. Yeah, we don't exactly have many choices of units at this stage of the game. In fact, we literally only have the Marauders at tier 1. And with these options, this really is the best you can do. You want to create a couple of separate lines and send them around in groups, flanked by Spears and Hellscourgers in the middle. Send 1 or 2 of these lines to keep the enemy still, while you send your other groups around to flank the enemy and sandwich them to break them as quickly as possible. Of course, you want to support all this with your Lord, who can provide spell support wherever needed, alongside doing the majority of the melee damage in these early game battles. Now, realistically, you're going to have a couple more units than this available to you, but if you're thinking worst case scenario and you can only get tier 1 units, this is the best we got. Coming to tier 2 now, thankfully it's looking a little bit more varied, still being led by that Herald of Slaanesh with the Lore of Slaanesh. Should have more spells online by now, and perhaps a mount. Going to also pick up a Allurus of Shadows. Going to pick up a hero early and grab the other Lore of Magic for a bit of variety. Of course, they are essentially weaker heralds, so you want to use them basically the same. For the front lines, we're going to go with 2 Marauder Spears and 4 Marauder Hellscourgers. Yeah, we haven't escaped them yet, but we're down to a reasonable number, and now we're going to have some actual units to do some damage. You're going to pick up 6 Demonettes. These are going to act as your flanking units, as they have high speed and great damage, especially if they can get into enemy backs and make the most of their charge and flanking. And finally, we're going to go with 6 Chaos Furies. These will be focusing down the enemy backlines to take out ranged units as quickly as possible to open the way for your Demonettes. So you're going to pin down the enemy with your Marauders and move the Demonettes in for a flank to take out the front lines as quickly as possible. Your Furies will take out the enemy ranged, or at least keep them busy whilst your front lines are working. Your Lord and Hero will provide magical support needed with their powerful magic, and of course, great fighting capability. And as with most Slaanesh armies, this one is pretty speedy, so it gives the enemy no time to prepare, allowing you to catch them off balance. And finally we come to tier 3. This army is going to be led by the Exalted Keeper of Secrets of Slaanesh. Of course, we're going to go for the evolution because they're just too powerful not to. They're now extremely powerful monsters, alongside their spell spots and great mobility. The Allurus of Shadow should have all their spells in a mount by now for combat and magical spots wherever needed. Going to upgrade to 6 Exalted Demonettes for our front lines, massive upgrade with a slight shift in rolls for the Demonettes, since we don't really have any room for another pack of infantry. Now for our flanking cav, we're going to go for either 4 Heart Seekers of Slaanesh, or 4 Exalted Seeker Chariots. Now if you can handle the micro, the Seekers will do so much more work as their charging power is just truly spectacular. If you can't micro them however, they're going to die quickly and you'll get no value out of them, so it's just easier to go for Heart Seekers. They're easier to use, do great damage, alongside a decent charge bonus, all while being much easier to manage as you can set them and forget them just a little bit more. Either way, you're going to be using either of them to take down the enemy backlines as quickly as possible before coming back to focus on the remaining front lines. For our monsters, we're going to go with 4 Fiends of Slaanesh. These lads can either go into the front lines or around to flank them, you can't really go wrong. Going to go with 2 Soul Grinders. You want to embed these lines in the front lines or target enemy large units or cavalry to focus them down with that anti-large damage. And finally, we're going to go with 2 Keepers of Secrets. Not really a bad way to use them, since the high damage and speed allow them to be anywhere to take on anything with ease. Lord and Hero in this army will have a ton of magical presence alongside their high damage, depending on what mount you get the Allurus on, of course. The powerful front lines combined with monsters will tear through enemy that enemy can throw at you in rapid speed. The high speed monsters and cav can take out any backlines with ease, as well as charging down rival cav or obliterating front lines. And the monsters are all multi-use and can take out the front lines, backlines, or large targets with ease. Basically, whatever you need to take out, this army can do it for you. And that is everything you need to know about Slaanesh in battle. If you enjoyed this video, then consider leaving it a like, and of course subscribe to see more videos like this, including the Kislev campaign guide, which is coming out on Monday. Leave any questions you have in the comments below, and I'll answer them as best I can. I'd like to take this time to thank all sponsors of the channel, like Dominic Shamas, and of course Henry Tucker, XGS, and Adam T for their support at the Unclean Ones tier. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a member here on YouTube, a subscriber on Twitch, or a patron on Patreon. Doing so gets you shoutouts at the end of videos, like all these lovely people. Huge thanks to all supporters, one more final thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.